Welcome everybody to this first video discussion of 2024 in the RICS Tech Partner Program series. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for nearly 13 years now. I currently sit within the thought leadership and analytics part of the organisation, and my role is to look at the impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with 110,000 members worldwide, working right across that property life cycle all the way through land, planning and development, construction, finance, brokerage, valuation, building surveying, building operation, asset management, etc. It's a very wide and broad canvas upon which data and tech is having a huge impact. And indeed, our members also work across all the major asset types, whether that's land itself, commercial in all its forms, residential, alternative assets and infrastructure. And today I'm really happy to have Morgan to join me on this first call of 2024 from Proptivity. So welcome, Morgan.
Thanks, Andrew. Nice to have us here.
Pleasure. And before we get into the bits and bytes, it's always nice to have a bit of kind of a backstory from a human perspective. So it'd be great to hear about your backstory, Morgan, and indeed the brief origin story of Proptivity itself.
Yeah, so happy to share. I am Swedish. Maybe you can hear from my accent. Basically born in Sweden, lived most of my life outside of Sweden, actually, together with Ericsson, mostly working life. So a telecom person. Started working in Proptivity a couple of years ago. And Proptivity is I don't know, the term is probably not so familiar, but it's a neutral host. That's kind of a lingo term, meaning that we build shared infrastructure that can be used by multiple parties. And I'm sure we will go into what exactly that means and in the context of mobile and 5G. Proptivity is created by a large Nordic a real estate service company called Stronghold, who has a ownership in music, and that's maybe a company which could be familiar to people here in the call.
Thanks, Morgan. Now, you obviously mentioned, 5G and networks, and that's very much the core of our conversation today. And I guess my first question to you is that we're talking about, as you say, putting neutral infrastructure into buildings, but why are mobile networks needed indoors? Isn't Wi-Fi enough these days?
Yeah, that's the most common question I talk about, I think, all the time. And I think I don't need to go too far outside of myself and the use case. And if I look at my daily life, if I go to the office from here, I live basically walking distance to my office. I walk, I listen to either I am on a call, I listen to something or listen to a podcast or something. And if I'm on a call, I want to go into the building. Of course, I don't want to lose the call, which is something we all have experienced. That I'm entering the elevator, I'll be back soon, and then you. So those are the Wi-Fi connectivity from a business perspective are normally only covering your exact workspace. It's not covering anything outside of that. But now you are expected to work everywhere, not just in the office space, but also at home or between. And I think that's one reason why mobile connectivity is actually needed inside the building as a totality. Also, when it comes to mobile calls, there are functions normally today you can use, like Wi-Fi calling maybe is familiar, but most people like myself have turned them off because they are quite not so good, and battery consumption is very high when you use them, so you tend to turn them off, and then you actually do rely on mobile connectivity to get phone calls. I don't know if anyone actually gets phone calls anymore, but if you do, then you still need that coverage. So I think that's kind of in the office space. If you go to the retail environment and the public space, it's even more important. I mean, shopping today is all about your phone. You pay with it, you identify, you even scan your items, or tomorrow you probably don't even need to scan them. You just are authenticated and you walk in and out. But 80% of people actually tell us that they are using their phone while shopping. So the phone has become an enormous kind of part of shopping experiences when you're also outside physically. So I think, and Wi-Fi has been tested there, but to be honest, I mean, there's almost no one logging in because it's too cumbersome. You kind of you rely on mobility, and if it doesn't work, you're just frustrated. You actually do not take the effort to log in anyway. And then you have, if you go in a shopping mall, you have like 50 shops. Should you log into each one of them? H&M Wi-Fi, Costco Wi-Fi? Yeah, you don't. So they have already gone past that, and in retail now, mobility is the key for that.
Indeed.
Does that
And how
kind
about,
of give a flavor?
yeah, and how about private networks? How do they relate to the indoor network challenge?
Private networks is, or has been, and still is, quite a kind of hot, popular topic. And when we talk about private networks, it's, I don't know, for the people on the call who are maybe not so technical, it's more or less like a mini mobile network.
Mhm.
The USA often like manufacturing sites. You can deploy your own base stations. You can have your own like little core network in the basement, and you control that network, and you can connect the devices you have and you own to that network. That relies on the fact that you have access to frequency spectrum, because spectrum is the key here, and also the one which costs a lot of money for operators like Vodafone, and they pay a lot for a spectrum. But there are normally in Europe and in US, there has been allocated spectrum now for private usage. And that's normally then what we talk about when we talk about these private networks, that this private spectrum is used in a private space, could be outdoors and indoors, but you need to have then kind of right or your authority to use that spectrum in that space. So, but still, even though, and this is probably a really good thing for, like, let's say hospitals. If you need to secure communication, even if everything else fails, then having your own service control is probably needed, because that's the only way you can. Otherwise, you're relying on something on a cloud, Google Cloud or Amazon Cloud somewhere, which doesn't work. So those situations, and so mostly when we hear about private networks today, it's in relation to manufacturing, hospitals,
Yeah.
those type of high demand environments. But even in those environments, we spoke to a mining company the other day, a big Swedish mining company. They have, he said, 400 partners. He said, I need them to have connectivity because
Mm.
they all bring their own solution into my space. Even if I have my own network down in a mine, it doesn't help me. It doesn't help them, because then I need to give them access, which is really cumbersome. So he also wanted to have public services in that space, so they can bring Vodafone or Three or whoever they want to use, even if it's in his mine. So he wanted both public and private in that space. So that's maybe the most advanced use case we can see so far.
So, I mean, when we consider this kind of issue around indoor connectivity, what are the issues around sort of quality? The different, obviously 5G is rolling out in various countries. What are the
Hmm.
issues now? You've touched on this issue of using calling over Wi-Fi and that really not being ideal. What are the quality and serviceability? And as I say, with 5G coming up, what are those issues out there around what the landscape currently looks like?
Maybe to discuss that, we can go back a bit as well in time. So we started this like 5G. Okay, everyone knows 5G, 4G, 3G, 2G, 1G, but the biggest difference in those generations of mobile systems has been the frequency spectrum, which has been allocated. That's kind of of course, technology has changed, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, what has also happened is that you have started using higher and higher frequencies. So this latest, this 5G, the biggest difference between 4G is actually the space which has been allocated on higher frequencies. That is the main differentiate of creating this massive data capacity, massive speeds. That's actually that spectrum. in Europe it's been 3.7 gigahertz. 3.5, 3.7 gigahertz. That's the new spectrum allocated. And in that spectrum, you get all of these cool, fantastic 5G things. But that spectrum, if you consider your Wi-Fi at home, how far, if you put one antenna in one living room and you go to the opposite side of your house, is it automatic that you have coverage there? No, it's not. It's actually difficult. And that is the same type of frequency spectrum used. So normally Wi-Fi is between 2 and 5 gigahertz. And there you are. That's the challenge for mobile operators today. You have high frequencies and you try to push them out from the outside into buildings, which is not going to, it hardly worked with the old frequencies, which is much lower, which penetrates buildings much better. But today, when you have metallic windows, metallic sheets on windows, you guys are building very efficient houses, keeping everything inside houses. But in reality, it also keeps everything from the outside coming into houses. So we speak a lot to property owners who have just launched new buildings, and people are super surprised when suddenly coverage is zero. But if you have insulation and metallic windows, it's not going to work. You're not going to get radio signals from the outside to penetrate buildings, and put that in concrete as well. And yeah, it's a difficult challenge environments. So I think that is the future challenge. So this true 5G thing, if we want that to be available inside buildings, and to be honest, inside is where we are. 89, yeah, I'm 95% inside. So and actually the normal statistics being used by companies like Ericsson is 80% of all the mobile data, meaning all the usage of mobile phones, is inside. 80% of every data consumed in the mobile networks, it's not outside, it's actually inside. So this will not become easier or simpler. This is going to be more and more tricky. The better buildings we build, the higher capacity we want to use. So that's the challenge for you guys, I think, in the future. How to secure customers' experience of connectivity, regardless. I think. So it needs to go from today being kind of an afterthought. Yeah. So yeah, we will fix that later. But once you stand there and you have the metallic sheets and you have zero coverage, it's not that easy actually. It takes time. It takes maybe 12 months to fix that, and 12 months of unhappy tenants. Super fantastic.
And when you I mean, you mentioned talking to some quite, from our perspective, unusual use cases in terms of mining, but you also talk about things like hospitals. But what kind of things are you talking to about your clients in terms of where they're seeing this real need now, both because, as you say, buildings themselves becoming perhaps less amenable to letting the signals in? What kind of problems are you seeing, or opportunities that your clients are talking about across different asset types?
Yeah. So we are mainly focused on office premises or shopping premises. And normally in Sweden, at least, and even in UK, you have most often both. So you have some sort of shopping environment and you have office environments in the same type of buildings. But those are so office buildings are by far the most common use case we have seen today. And here, I think if we then look at what's there today as in terms of need, is more what we talked about earlier, meaning that people expect to be able to communicate and use their phones regardless if there are elevators or stairs. Or the most funny example I have actually is a company, a property company who started a car sharing service in the garage. So the new trendy service, yeah, you share cars, which is fantastic. But the only slight challenge with that was that the whole service was built upon that you could open your car with your phone standing next to the car, but there was zero coverage inside the garage. So yeah, good thinking, but in reality, connectivity was the baseline for that service. And we also hear a lot about chargers, electric vehicle chargers, popular in Norway and Sweden at least. Those communicate a lot to needs connectivity. So now they have to build kind of unique solutions just to make that happen, because there's no coverage in that garage. So those are the type of use cases we see today. I think the one we talk about as the future use case here, if you look at from an office perspective, there's one aspect coming from the property owner itself. So today, you as a property, you have probably several different networks covering sensors and security and so on. So those type of solutions we are looking at, and many are looking at. So can we kind of consolidate and use mobility as the single kind of connectivity platform? So you make it more efficient, and if you're gonna if you want to use a security solution provider, you would automatically know that there is coverage in that corner over there. So I can put up a camera there. I will have coverage there. I don't need to send a person in to measure or fix, meaning even worse, fix a cable there, because that's expensive. So you have this property aspect of connectivity, which we are talking a lot to property owners about, but probably not the driving factor. It's more the tenant experience, which is the driving factor. And here we see security and kind of efficiency from a tenant perspective. If I spend time on office use case now, in service we have recently done more or less 50%, 46% of office tenants are unhappy with the way their current Wi-Fi connectivity works. So 50%. And if you recalculating to spend, I mean, time spent or lost doing things or being frustrated, that's a lot of money. And if you link that to this hybrid environment we are now in, meaning that you're down to basically 30% of your total time spent in office, and majority of your time is actually not spent in office. So the security, how do you secure an employee both in the office but also outside of office in that world? And here mobility and the connectivity barrier and the operators have started to kind of find solutions. So more or less, you're always secure. It doesn't matter where you are, you're always secure. That's the foundation of that. And if that's what you're going to use, why don't you use that as well in the office? Why have a different IT environment just for the office when 80 or 70% is outside of that space? Why not just have the same? Those thoughts, this is not the mature area for sure, but those thoughts we are discussing with kind of large tenants at the moment, big companies, and see how they, and then from a office, like a co-working smaller office property owner, here it's a different aspect of this, and say, okay, so we are a small company, we are not that big, we just changed offices recently, and since I was since I was most interested in this, I was also put in charge of doing the office movement, which included fixing connectivity. So then we started comparing, okay, I needed to find a way to get a leased line into the office. I needed to physically find kind of cables from the basement to my physical office. I spent, I think, 3-4 weeks just finding offers from different broadband providers in making that happen. Totally unnecessary if we could have already brought our own connectivity, which we actually did. So all of us have 5G laptops. We just brought our laptops and we started working. No change needed. I didn't need to do all of this. So, but we did the comparison just to have this idea of how much effort does it take a small company to fix connectivity in that kind of situation of changing offices. So enormously kind of flexible. So that is another aspect of this. Can you make it more efficient for your tenants? And the answer is yeah, sure.
Indeed, and obviously that's a kind of a whole building approach where you've got multiple tenants, but they all want to have the kind of effectively that same flexibility. So, I mean,
Mm,
to get into almost the detail now, but I mean, how are indoor networks being built today, and arguably what's next in terms of that evolution to actually
mm,
deliver this kind of seamless connectivity for mobile workers, but also that connectivity for the Internet of Things, all those sensors, all those
mm,
devices, the EVs, those kind of use cases, where, as you say, you need that mobile coverage in every part of the building.
mm. Normally, and different maturity in different countries. Sweden is fairly mature
Mm.
in this area. They have built indoor networks since more or less the 90s, and some of them, some of the bigger property owners have not built. They have more or less built indoor networks in all kind of top tier buildings since like 10, 20 years ago. What they did then, and still do, by the way, is using something called passive DOS. Maybe a word someone has heard. It's more or less coax cables. So
Yeah.
you put the base station in the basement from the operator, and then you more or less pipe radio signals, actual radio signals throughout the building, and then you end up with small kind of Mexican hats. If anyone sees small Mexican hats, that's
Yeah.
that's normally these type of networks. And the challenge with that is that the coax cables are need to be fairly thick in order to transmit frequencies in efficient ways. And if you're going to do this, what I said in the beginning, true 5G, meaning high frequencies with a lot of spectrum, you would have to have cables which is basically like 5 centimeters.
Mm.
And it's not enough that you have one of these. You need to have four of them to each single antenna point. You need four of these, and it's not physically possible to do that, and it's not practically or cost effective in any way. And still, you would only have a kind of a fraction of the capacity you need. So the new way of doing things is to use something is called like an active antenna. It's more or less like an electronic antenna instead of like a practical antenna. It's distributing frequencies, but it's doing it electronically. So it's connected with Ethernet cable. So I mean a big difference from a fat coax cable to a normal Ethernet cable. So if you do a rebuild or remodeling, so of course using Ethernet is super easy compared to coax cables. So that's kind of the new way of doing it. The challenge with this and the new thing with this is that those boxes are actually radio base stations.
Mm.
So they transmit frequencies, meaning that the person who owns that box has to have a license for
Ah.
that box. So you need to become an operator, but you don't want to have like four of these. Like in UK, maybe you have 3 or 4 operators. You don't want to have four of these boxes in the roof, and each operator have its own. That's one solution, of course, but that's not the practical kind of ESG friendly solution. You need to have a shared infrastructure, and this is totally possible today. But that also means that someone other than the operator probably needs to own that box and have that license and being responsible for operating and maintaining. But that also means that you need to connect all the operators with the quality they would expect to have in the network. So it becomes totally the next level of challenge to build this network on a telecom grade quality, which has to be. And that's why you need neutral hosts, and Proptivity will be one of them.
I mean, you've talked about a number of use cases and sort of opportunities, but what would you perhaps highlight as being the biggest opportunity if we can establish this high capacity in not just offices but other asset types? What's the
Mm.
killer app, as they call it, in terms of driving this kind of adoption?
Uh, Normally, when we talk about this, if you go really high up, and we think about this as the whole CO2 challenge.
Mm.
So properties is actually a big part of this. I think properties has it's like 30-40% of total consumption of. So unless we can digitalize the usage in those properties and for those properties, or all the processes which are related to properties, but most of those processes are in any one way or another will have to be connected. It's not going to be cables. It's probably going to be wireless connected, and many challenges, many processes will be connected to things happening outside of the buildings, which transfers into the buildings, or the opposite, meaning transport, for example, then and utilizations and so on. So I think if you look at it from a top helicopter perspective, if we want that to happen, if we think that's actually a requirement for the future, to have that world where more or less, I think it was Ericsson's slogan once upon a time, everything is connected, should be connected. But that cannot be happen unless you have a seamless world where that is simply executed. And today we don't have that, to be honest. I mean, that doesn't exist. So that is the biggest society gain for this. For an property owner, I think, and when we then measure it, we have seen, I mean, tenants, 89% of tenants, when we asked them in the survey we did in November, December, together with this our sister company, Newsec, 89% of tenants would rather even pay more, or pick a facility which has good mobile coverage. I mean, practicality. So only that aspect means that if you want to have an attractive building for retail, it's going to be a no-brainer, because they cannot survive unless they have connected customers. So for retail, it's going to have to become a sales point very soon. For offices, it's still going to have, maybe short term at least, be something which is looked at as important enough to say, I would rather pick that one in that building instead of this one. So short term, I think that's the attractiveness, being able to fill your vacancies, which is a slight challenge, I guess, today with almost 40% vacancy rate. So how to make it attractive?
Indeed.
Connectivity has to be that part.
And I guess the final kind of flip side question for you, Morgan, is what are the challenges about making this happen? You've mentioned the kind of issues around licenses, which by the sounds of it can be sort of overcome. There'll clearly be to some degree a cost issue, but clearly the benefits seem fairly strong. But is there an educational issue here? Are asset owners not quite sure about what 5G means, and thus the limitations of the buildings that they're now building that are, as you say, are going to block signals? And so what are the kind of barriers to actually getting this moving at scale?
I think the biggest barrier is the whole model for connectivity has been on the macro level outside, meaning the operators build and pay and do it. I'm sure in UK, in Sweden, some buildings are so attractive, so operators have more or less trampled on top of each other to make it happen in those buildings. So whatever it takes, we will fix it. But those buildings are like a fraction of the buildings where we now talk. When we talk about indoor, we talk about the other 99%. And here there is a expectation of from property owners we talk to as well, said, yeah, but operators, that's their business, they should pay for that and they should help us fix that. But when you look at the revenues from a telecom space, and if you recalculate that into kind of an office building space, so maybe let's just make an assumption. Let's say you have £1,000 per square meter per year for a space. If you compare that to the number of telco money for that same space, meaning the tenants and what they spend on telco, that's a factor 1 to 100. So telcos have no business case of installing all of these networks. It doesn't exist. So that is one of the learnings I think we have kind of gradually had the the property owners to understand that, but you actually make 100 times more by leasing that space to someone who also thinks connectivity is very important. So you need to feel that you own that problem, otherwise no one else will own it. So as soon as that happens, then the business models to make that work, that's going to be the challenge. And today there is a practical challenge that there's no property owner in the world who would say that, yes, I want to build only Vodafone in my building, because maybe the next tenant is not Vodafone. Maybe the next tenant has 3, and so on, so on. And if it's a multi-tenant building, that's a no-go from start. So property owners wants to have multi-operator, public and maybe private capability in that, and they don't want to have overlaying networks. They want to have single, effective, cost-effective, because otherwise it's also going to be too expensive. So that is the knot which we have to kind of undo in order to make that work. So that's the biggest challenge: understanding and also make these business models easy for both the telecom world and the real estate world to execute on together, because it's a together problem. It's not a single problem.
Indeed, but I guess you have some positive drivers there in terms of the kind of focus now, as you said earlier, on kind of ESG efficient buildings, on high quality spaces. That you have the drivers that are saying that actually that the tenants, the occupiers, I think, are becoming perhaps the dynamics are there, that they're more demanding in terms of the quality of space they have. So I think there probably is a natural momentum here for the kind of quality of spaces to be improved in all these dimensions. So, well, for today, Morgan, thanks ever so much for your time. It's been a fascinating conversation, and it'd be good to catch up soon and hear how the market's evolving and adapting on turning, as you say, not just the shiny buildings in the central business district, but every building into somewhere where you can walk in seamlessly and still expect to have that level of connectivity on your mobile.
Yeah, it has to happen over time. Otherwise, this society will not reap all the benefits. Especially when I get my AR glasses from Apple, they need to work everywhere I am, not just at home.
I'm just hoping that these AR glasses will support prescription, so that for those of us who are optically challenged, we can still use them as well.
Actually, I just saw the note from Apple that yes, you can buy lenses inside for your own strength.
Perfect. Well, on that note, have a great day. Thanks ever so much for your time, Morgan. Great to chat.
Thanks, Andrew. Talk to you soon again.